Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I thought last night, as the Majority Whip just mentioned, the President once again showed that his sense of why the majority in the Congress and the majority of the people in the country support the Keystone XL pipeline is not just about the pipeline, even though he doesn't seem to ever quite get that. It's about whether we're going to truly take advantage of more American energy. And clearly the President suggested that was one of the great accomplishments of his administration. I think you could make the argument and make it effectively that his administration hasn't done much to implement the great steps we've made forward. And in fact, on public lands and other things that we were in the process of using when he became president, they have backed away from that rather than step forward. We seem to be unwilling to step forward and embrace this great opportunity that's so much more than the jobs for just the pipeline itself. But Mr. President, I filed 2 amendments on the pipeline bill today. The topic we're talking about, the topic that my good friend from North Dakota has done so much to bring attention to since the day he and I arrived in the Senate 4 years ago, when the Keystone XL pipeline application was only 2 years old at the time. Now, 6 years later, we're continuing to miss an opportunity. It seems on this topic, as once was said about seeking solutions in the Middle East, we can't seem to miss an opportunity. But the 2 amendments that I'd like to file, that I have filed, deal with a couple of critical issues that relate to our energy future and our infrastructure future. One would be a community affordability amendment, to where we'd have to have a study to look at the impact that all these EP regulations have on communities. EPA's unfunded mandates on communities, where they tell communities they have to do things, but really don't give the community any idea how to pay for it. Mr. President, you and I are from 2 states that have lots of small communities. But those small communities often have a water system and a sewer system and a stormwater system. And EPA comes in and says, here's what we want you to do. Maybe not with one of those, maybe with all of those. The air quality, the water quality. I know EPA has one regulation on water where the solution can't cost more than 2% of the median income over a specific period of time. Now, 2% of your income, if you haven't been paying it for your water bill or your sewer bill or your whatever bill, 2% of your income just taken right off the top of your income makes a real difference to most families, but at least there's a cap there. But you know, you could have that 2% on water, on increasing the cost of the water system, and another 2 or 4 or 5% on increasing the stormwater system. And somebody has to pay those bills. What this amendment does is suggest that we figure out who's paying those bills, what's a reasonable way to pay those bills, and how those bills can be paid. Now, we know on the Senate floor, and the President knows, and the EPA knows who pays the bills, the people that have the access to those services. There's no mythical payee here. The person who pays your utility bill is you. And if there's increased cost to the utility system, that comes to you. The person that pays your water bill is you. And so I believe we need to have a coordinated effort to see how these projects impact communities and impact families, and understand how this works. So this amendment that I filed today directs the EPA to collaborate with the National Academy of Public Administration to review existing studies of costs associated with major EPA regulations. The amendment also directs the administration to determine how different localities can effectively fund these projects. The end result would be to come up with a working definition of a phrase they use a lot, individual and community affordability, but I can't find any evidence that that phrase, individual and community affordability, really means anything. The amendment that I filed today has already been endorsed by the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, and the Chamber of Commerce in my hometown, Springfield, Missouri. The other amendment that I'm filing introduced a sense of the Senate that the president's U.S.-China greenhouse gas amendment would be looked at in a different way. This amendment is co-sponsored by my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe. It talks about the agreement negotiated between the president and the People's Republic of China, and in fact says that this agreement really has no force and effect because, frankly, Mr. President, it already has no force and effect in China. We're the only of the two parties that the president says have agreed to this. We're the only one that would have to do anything. We think this is a bad deal, Senator Inhofe and I think many others will join us. A bad deal for our country. It's economically unfair, it's environmentally irresponsible, and once again produces just exactly the opposite result of what we'd want. First of all, Mr. President, I think the Constitution's pretty clear on agreements negotiated between countries. There is a Senate role to be played. It requires the advice and consent of the Senate. The Senate should insist that we do that job. Whether it's here or any other agreements with other countries, those agreements need to be consented to by the United States Senate. Happens to say that in the Constitution. These agreements under this amendment also would have to be accompanied by actions of what it costs to implement the agreement. The amendment says the United States should not sign bilateral or other international agreements on greenhouse gases that will cause serious economic harm to the United States. It says the U.S. should not agree to any bilateral or international agreement imposing unequal greenhouse gas commitments on the United States. The reason I filed this amendment is simple. The agreement the president unilaterally negotiated with China and announced last November is a bad deal for workers. It's a bad deal for families, whether those workers are in Missouri or Arkansas or anywhere else in the country today. The agreement requires the United States to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 26 to 28% below the 2005 levels by 2025. It allows the Chinese to increase their emissions until 2030. So last night, Mr. President, the Speaker said in the State of the Union, the United States will double the pace on which we cut carbon pollution, and China committed for the first time to limiting their emissions. Well, let's be very frank about that. The president's actually right. He's agreed that we would double the pace, somewhere 26 to 28% below the 2005 levels in the near term. But the Chinese have agreed actually to be able to increase their emissions for another 15 years. And then they would consider reducing emissions after that. Now, what this does is drive jobs and opportunity to China and other countries that, again, care a lot less about what comes out of the smokestack than we do. We lose the jobs we otherwise would have had. We try to solve a global problem on our own, even though we've made great strides already, some of which were cost-effective, but they get less cost-effective all the time. And so, Mr. President, I'm grateful my colleagues allowed me to have a few extra minutes here. I've filed these amendments. We'll be talking more about them and the Keystone XL pipeline issue over the next few days. I look forward to having a vote on these amendments and a vote on the Keystone XL pipeline.